The airstrikes last night reportedly hit targets near the Syrian capital of Damascus, as well as on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. And these attacks come just as Iran's foreign minister is meeting with his Russian counterpart in Moscow to discuss regional developments. Now, to break down how these two stories are related, we have our correspondent Jotam Confino with us live from Tel Aviv. So, Jotam, it is not unusual that Israel is striking Iranian targets in Syria. In fact, they've carried out hundreds of attacks in the past couple of years. But is this just business as usual for Israel, or is something else going on here?
Under normal circumstances, it could be described as business as usual. We have to remember that the Israeli military, sometimes on a weekly basis, are carrying out these strikes. But now, because of the tensions between Iran and Israel, because of the many mysterious explosions in Iran, it's much more dangerous. And also, Hezbollah, a couple of hours ago, the terrorist group in Lebanon, confirmed that one of their members was indeed killed in this particular strike. And this, of course, could be an opportunity for Hezbollah to retaliate for this.
Now, like I said before, Iranian Foreign Minister ZARIF is meeting with Russian Foreign Minister LAVROV in Moscow. And surely ZARIF is going to bring these strikes up with Russia, given that Russia is controlling large parts of Syrian airspace, no?
Indeed, and ZARIF will probably bring this up, but it's, again, nothing new. This is a very soft and weak spot between Iran and Syria because they do support Bashar al-Assad. But when it comes to Israel, they are completely different. Russia is basically allowing Israel to carry out these airstrikes as long as Israel doesn't hit Russian targets. And they're turning a blind eye to it, basically. And this is something that is really, really worrying for Iran, but they can pressure Russia into changing its policy. Russia calls the shots here.
Now, don't go anywhere, Jotam, because another story is breaking today that seems to be related to Israel's shadow war with Iran. According to Israel's intelligence agency, the SHIN bet, Iran and Hezbollah have funded and trained members of a Palestinian cell in the West Bank. Now, this cell was not only planning an attack on a city in northern Israel, but also was set to abduct an Israeli soldier. The SHIN bet says that they've arrested at least 10 people so far. So, Jotam, tell us more about Iran and Hezbollah's involvement with this cell specifically.
It's a bit of a complicated story, but to break it down fairly easy, this particular cell was apparently basically receiving money from Iran and from Hezbollah, and they were operated by another operation that was in Syria. So this Syrian organization received a lot of money from Iran and from Hezbollah, and they channeled the money through their organization to this cell in the West Bank. And it's very worrying for Israel that we see these planned attacks coming basically with an instruction from Iran and Hezbollah. Normally it's Hamas that is trying to carry out these terrorist attacks in the West Bank.
Right. Well, is this Iran's way of retaliating against, these attacks that we're seeing in Syria and of course the alleged, the alleged cyber attack, on its nuclear site?
Definitely. But again, this is something that has been going on for a long, long time. In fact, Shin Bet arrested some of these members of this particular cell back in April. So it was actually before the explosions happened in Iran, which means that Iran has been planning this for a long time, and also Hezbollah. This is something that they've been doing for a long time, but it's not very often we hear that they're actually arresting people that are being funded directly from Iran and Hezbollah. Usually, like I said, it's Hamas that operates in the West Bank.